Greetings, fellow Star Trek fans, and welcome to Captain's Yacht, a Star Trek podcast run by two inner city high school teachers evaluating the Star Trek universe through the lenses of history and literature. A little reminder before we beam aboard the Captain's Yacht: if you like what you see or have feedback for us, please like, share, subscribe, and comment, and we'd love to hear from you. So, let's beam aboard the Captain's Yacht and see what we're talking about today.
My friends, we are now moving on to episode 11 of season 1. We're cruising through this. This is exciting. And that episode is Haven. Stardate 41294.5. In this episode, let's talk about what goes down. As Picard and the Enterprise are about to enjoy some shore leave on the planet Haven, Troy finds out that she is to be part of an arranged marriage to a family friend out of her father's past. Meanwhile, an alien species thought to be long dead emerges, still carrying the plague that annihilated their civilization. Dun dun dun. So, genres, this is straight up romance with a capital R, my friends. And it's a little bit of space opera too, because we got a magical planet in the background that we actually never go to or find out much about, but that's okay. So what else is happening trope-wise? We have an over-the-top alien ritual, and that is a naked Betazoid wedding. We're all guests. Even the wedding official is to appear nude. And that's pretty crazy. And to me, that's an over-the-top alien ritual. We're going to have a lot of those in TNG. There's also some prophetic dreams. There's also a magic planet that supposedly has healing properties, but we never get to see it. And a very Trek trope, we have shore leave interrupted. We're going to get this a couple more times. So those are some of the big parts and pieces working in this episode. That is mostly structured around Troy having to deal with the fact that she's now to participate in this arranged marriage. So tell us a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes with this.
Well, there isn't much, but there's a couple things to bring up here. The original titles for this episode, there were two titles in earlier scripts: Love Beyond Time and Space, which made me think of Interstellar by Christopher Nolan.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And Eye of the Beholder, which incidentally enough will be the title of a Next Generation episode later on in the show. Also, if you pay special attention to the hair, you'll notice that this episode was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Achievement in Hairstyling. So,
wow.
Not a lot of drama behind the scenes on this one, not that I could find. But you have the first appearance of Majel Barrett Roddenberry, who we could do an entire episode on her life and her relationship with Gene Roddenberry in Star Trek. It is very colorful and multifaceted, but none of that applies to this particular episode. So, getting into deep cuts here, what works about this episode? The main crux of this episode is the relationship between characters. There are mainly three that I can think of off the top of my head. You got another relationship that you explore, but for the purposes of the main characters, you have Riker and Troy. You take a look at Riker's goals and ambitions, summarized by the line, "Bill, more than anything, you want to be a starship captain, correct?" Which is what Troy says to Riker. Riker replies with, "But that's not all I want, Deanna," which gives him some dimensions. There you go. Yeah, very sweet and very precious. But in terms of characterization and in terms of current Star Trek not understanding dimensionality to characters, that's a nice touch. You have something, Scholar
Question:
Bennett?
What do you think about Bill versus Will? Just, as in calling Riker by his first name or shortening his first name.
It shows very deep affection, and that's something that just from my perspective, that's what it signals. It signals extreme affection and basically the implication that there is a long and detailed story behind these two characters. And they get into that various degrees later on in future installments.
But
Yeah.
what do you think about changing it from Bill to Will? Because I can hear Picard and Troy say Will, 20 or 30 or 40 more times in the series, but they're not going to call him Bill much more than like what, one more time, or this is the last time. I
And you
just
might have
curious.
noticed, that only Troy does that.
Yes.
So, and that's what I'm getting at in terms of the dimensionality of their relationship. There's the professional relationship where her default for referring to Riker is Commander Riker, and then Will, and then when it really gets into the heat of it, Bill.
That's right.
So yeah, you can definitely gauge the emotional intensity of a scene based off of how Troy refers to Riker. It's either Commander Riker, Will, and then when you really need it, the break the glass moment is Bill. So
And then I guess
yeah.
you have Imzadi too.
Oh, and then you got Imzadi too. But that's definitely something to bring up there. You also get more characterization for Deanna, as Deanna Troi, as seen by her relationship with her mother. The eccentric, by Troy's attribution, Loxana Troi flaunts her powers while Deanna conceals them. She's more pragmatic and adaptive. She says a starship has its customs just as Betazoids do. I'm paraphrasing that a little bit, but you really definitely see Troy's pragmatism in a way that I think is really interesting when compared to her mother. And then the punchline relationship for every single episode of Star Trek is Picard and Loxana, Troy's mother. They're polar opposites of each other, and yet some way, somehow, they kind of give off a vibe of being an old married couple. Picard is formal and rigid. Loxana, fingernails on a chalkboard can be a proper description of her mannerisms, but she's, to channel Picard's diplomacy, free-spirited. She is definitely free-spirited.
Yes. When I first watched this series, Loxana and Q grated on me. But honestly, they're some of my favorite people to come back to and appreciate. I'm glad they're not main cast, but at the same time, they are awesome. Okay, yeah, I want to elaborate on that relationship piece just a little bit, because I'm seeing a couple other things going on here. And I'm thinking of this in terms of like not only love triangles, but then we got some like love squares or quadrilaterals or some crazy stuff going on. So yeah, as you alluded to, this is a story about relationships. We got the Troy Riker one. That's the pretty obvious one. That's, in my opinion, that's kind of a 24th century look on relationships. And in this episode, they have to process their feelings for each other, and Riker ends up processing his feelings by brooding on the holodeck. And then we have another relationship with Troy and Wyatt, the man that she is supposed to marry. And that's kind of like a 16th century look, because this is an arranged marriage. And those two characters have to process what this ritual means for themselves. And they are actually able to find some bond and chemistry rather quickly, which is interesting. Wyatt's kind of a sensitive artist type.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, we have Wyatt and this mysterious kind of dreamy blonde woman, okay? And that's kind of like a timeless look at relationships, like that prophetic, deep, love. And this is kind of the least understood relationship in the episode, but it's also the most important and helps Wyatt, who is a doctor. You may have missed it because he paints, and that's kind of the central kind of like character thing they introduce. But yeah, they say that he practices medicine. He slips that in there in like a line or two. And that now that he has met this woman out of his dreams, he's actually able to fulfill his own purpose as a healer of these Torellians who, like, as I alluded to in the premise discussion, I keep saying alluded to, as I mentioned in the premise discussion, they're infected by this plague, which, Starfleet thought wiped out their entire civilization. So actually that final relationship materializes, Wyatt's purpose in life, so to speak. which is really interesting. That's honestly what relationships, are supposed to do, help both people flourish.
Oh
So
yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. So, yeah, this is definitely a look at relationships, and you hit the big ones between the main cast. But there are a couple other smaller things going on also that I think are interesting to look at.
So with that said, Scholar Beta, what doesn't work about this episode?
Yeah, my number one complaint about this is that we get our first true Counselor Troy episode, and it's about her in a relationship. And not
Yeah.
only a relationship or a romance, but a wedding, a union where she has zero, as in no, agency. She has really no choice in this. She basically says in the teaser, which is all of 2 minutes, that it's my marriage. So it's really, yeah, it's basically, this is what happens when men write women, and they do it quickly and they're not really thinking about it, in my opinion. Okay, we have this female, what do we do with her? Let's put her in a relationship. Okay, what kind of relationship? A marriage. How do we make it dramatic? Let's make it an arranged marriage, that she has no say in. So I'm not really. I really love Troy too, and I think Troy is one of the least utilized of the bridge crew. That is actually incredibly cool as a great character. So it kind of hurts to see this go down.
Definitely.
Any thoughts on that, or did you read that as well, or yeah, what else?
Yeah, I
there?
definitely read that. I the 16th century description that you use, how the Riker Troy relationship is 24th century, and the 16th century is very benighted in many different ways, and not conservative, but archaic is definitely a good thing. So with that in mind, my perspective is this entire central concept falls flat.
Yeah.
Genetic bonding, Betazoid betrothal right. I got a lot of vibes that they were trying to go for a Pon Far thing from Amok Time. I kind of got that vibe a little bit, just a little bit, where in terms of this completely derails a character and we have to do this thing because tradition demands it. However, Amok Time does this light years better because in that situation, you have a culture that builds rites and traditions around a biological process, an infradian rhythm, to use psychology for Spock's Pon Far in the Vulcan Pon Far, once every 7 years. Chemical and hormonal changes happen, resulting in extreme madness that can only be solved by mating, for lack of a better word, aka the Spock and Heat thing. Nothing like that happens here. I wrote down, and I know you wrote some things in here too, where we just wrote a long list of questions about how this was not explored to the best of its ability. So it's established that Troy's late father and Stephen Miller, that name didn't age well, came
No,
to...
it didn't.
No,
Nice.
Stephen Miller came to an agreement that their children should marry each other. Why? On what basis is this genetic bonding supposed to happen? And you
it's
brought up an
between two
interesting
people
point.
of different species.
Yeah.
Ostensibly the genes of a Betazoid are pretty dramatically different. Racial biology doesn't exist, and the genetic difference between people with different skin colors is incredibly minor. Yet, you would think that the genetic difference between humans and Betazoids who have telepathy would be pretty significant. So why? Yeah, is this eugenics? I don't really get it. What's in it for Troy? What does she have no say in this? I don't really get that either.
Yeah, and there are so many times in which I just go, why? And again, why? So Wyatt's father invoked the right of marriage completely out of nowhere at the start of the episode. Why?
Yep.
At least within Amok Time, there's a biological reason for why Spock needs to participate in his arranged marriage. He's gonna die if he doesn't, because the Vulcan equivalent of cortisol is gonna go through the roof and Spock's gonna die. That makes sense. This doesn't. You bring up an
Yes.
interesting point on the function of arranged marriages, Scholar
Yeah,
Beta.
and I am calling this an arranged marriage. I know that it's technically not discussed that way in the episode. They call it a genetic bonding, but if it walks like a duck, you know what I'm saying? This is an arranged marriage. This is a sci-fi arranged marriage. And the whole point, okay, you're the historian, so I will kind of defer to you here in a second, but I have read a Game of Thrones, aka Song of Ice and Fire, many times, and I understand arranged marriages, my friend. And the point is that it is a political tool.
Yep.
It is to secure either a political union. It could be in another way to like secure hostages, so that two nations don't betray each other or something like that. So I don't understand why we would have an arranged marriage when there's zero politics involved
When,
here.
okay, so marriage, I would counter as a historian,
Please, yes, please.
where I agree with you with the political stuff. That is one function of an arranged marriage from the aristocratic side. You have two medieval kingdoms that are upset with each other. We marry the respective children of either side. It's over. No more conflict. But from a cultural standpoint, there's also socio-economical reasons for why you would want an arranged marriage.
Yes.
Yes, and that also falls flat because at least in the Federation, money and
The
upward
money.
mobility in that sense, yeah, it doesn't exist. So that's another way in which it falls flat. But I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that in addition to the political stuff that they like to play on for Game of Thrones and medieval literature like that, there's also a cultural and socio-economic reason for why you would have an arranged marriage. Um, it also could be, and this happens too, and this could have been interesting, they could have done a matchmaker where through culture or through some sort of sign that the Betazoid culture would say, okay, these two would work well with each other. Let's arrange a marriage that way. In some cultures in this world that happens. It'd be interesting to see that perspective, but we're not dealing with that kind of those kinds of demographics in the writing room.
Or
Go ahead.
what if it is, it is really bad for like I don't know how to for betazoids to continue to reproduce because for some reason, and that they have now decided in their culture that they're going to intermix with other species, for lack of a better word, to kind of dampen their telekinetic powers because maybe it brought on like too much civil war or strife. Because remember in the episode, okay, I gotta remember the name of this one. It's the
Which
one with the
one?
betas. The one with the Betazoid who has like a problem. Tin Man. The Tin Man. Do you remember that one?
Oh, okay. Yeah, Tin Man.
And he
Yep,
kind
I
of has
remember
like
Tin
some
Man.
issue where there's something going on with his Betazoid brain that's really that could be very bad. I can't. Maybe I'm looking into. Maybe I totally forgot about the premise of that episode. Need to go rewatch it. But I guess I'm thinking about the genetic part, and I'm really feeling like this is eugenics, and there's a reason. But Troy's already half Betazoid, so her powers are already dampened, so that just throws that whole idea completely out the window.
Oh yeah, we're putting a lot more thought into this tradition than the
Yes,
writers are, I think.
than they did. Okay, my last thought on
Yeah,
this, my friend, is just
go ahead.
who are the Millers? They don't seem to be friends. They don't seem to
Yeah,
be friends necessarily with Loxana. Maybe they were super close with Dad, and just we don't we don't get to actually see the actual real greatness of their relationship. But to me, they're just kind of nothings. We don't really see any.
yep.
We don't understand anything about their family.
They're
So yeah, I think there's a big nothing burger there.
they're not characters. They're plot devices. They are definitely not characters. And the only thing, okay, again, just to very briefly go back to the function of this tradition.
Yeah.
If the Millers invoke this ritual, as Troy established, do they or should they have the right to dictate how the ceremony is going to happen? Because it's very much set up that Loxana Troy's hands are tied here, and the Millers wanted it to happen, so it's going to happen because the Millers want it. And then they chafe back and forth on this again, having lived through my own wedding. There's a lot of instant drama and or comedy, depending on your perspective, as to how a wedding is put together. And considering this is an alien culture with great exotic powers, there'd be more guidelines, there'd be more comedy. I don't know. Again, we've discussed more about this than probably the writers did. Other thing I want to bring up here is the character of Wyatt is, from my perspective, the weakest part of the character of the episode. He's just a little bit better than the Millers themselves, the parents, in terms of a character. He's barely a character. Let's just put it that way. He's still a character. He's still worth discussing. The parents themselves are plot devices. So, so with a few extra revisions, this is what's so frustrating about him and about this episode. Wyatt is getting telepathic visions of a woman he thinks is Deanna.
Yes.
And with a few extra revisions, a few extra pieces, that concept could have worked. So if he's getting visions of a woman he thinks is Deanna Troi, wouldn't he also have actual pictures of Deanna Troi the same way Spock did with T'Pring in Amok Time? I mean, you would think that.
I just thought of that, actually. He's never looked her up on,
the equivalent of Facebook in the 24th century. Exactly. So, or maybe it would have been one.
Or the holodeck or something.
Exactly. It would have been one easy line of "I obeyed the traditions and I didn't look you up." Simple line. If that's part of the Betazoid tradition, in some cultures, even in Western wedding rites, marital rites, you do that after the rehearsal dinner. You don't, per tradition, you don't see your spouse until the ceremony. You could have done something with that and had it be from the time they're bonded to the time they meet, right before the wedding. You don't have that kind of contact. But no, Wyatt showers Troi with compliments about her beauty, but absolutely nothing else, making him appear really shallow. There's a line where Wyatt apologizes for the portraits and says Deanna is beautiful. Going back to what we said about him being a doctor, if he had more motivation into saying, okay, I'm a physician, you're a psychiatrist, psychologist, I can heal the body, you can heal the mind, we're perfect for each other that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
But they didn't put that much thought into it. Now, I'm going to blame the production breakdown on this, because there was a time, I need to research this some more, where squabbles between Roddenberry and the writers got to the point where production actually shut down for a couple weeks. And I am going to postulate, and this is just a tentative hypothesis, that it happened around this episode. Because these are softballs. These are full-on softballs where if you want to create an alien custom, have some fun with it, and they clearly don't. You had something else here, Scholar Beta.
This is just, this is coming from an unmarried participant in this conversation, but does marriage matter in the Federation? I mean, it's interesting that obviously they have children and they raise children. I say they, people in the Federation, people outside of the Federation, obviously, or in the member planets. I mean, they have children, they raise them, but, and I suppose monogamy is still probably quite important in the 24th century. It's just really interesting to me. I just, it's not really so much, if you're a Starfleet officer, it isn't about, creating a home. It isn't about, financial investment together, or, it isn't about, some of the other non-love or child-rearing parts of marriage, So I don't know. I'm just kind of curious. I just was thinking about the roles of marriage in the 24th century versus the 21st century.
That is a really good point, especially considering Roddenberry was so very anti-modern cultural conventions. Case in point, Roddenberry went off the deep end a couple times and made claims like, in the 24th century there is no military. Which completely contradicts the premise of the show. But he says there is no military in the 24th century. There is no money. That one's the most famous out of all of them, perhaps.
Yeah.
He says, mourning death is not a burden in the 24th century. And I'm going to save my explanation for that for an episode in season 3,
Yeah.
because there is a very specific episode that got derailed because of Roddenberry's dictum, that particular dictum. But Roddenberry, for better or worse, saw himself beyond the modern era and tried to create these hypotheses of what things would look like in 400 years. So yeah, I'd be very curious. I actually, you inspired me to look up if Roddenberry said anything about marriages, because that would be one of those institutions that I would argue Roddenberry would be against.
And I'm just gonna say really quickly that this show's kind of like a relationships, as in like without relationships. It's or a relational, or at least in the romantic sense. Riker never really gets with Troy until the films. Doctor never gets with the captain. It's not really till Deep Space Nine that we actually get some relationships. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Maybe in Voyager, if I'm missing one that I can't, that Chakotay and Seven
of Nine.
But yeah, this show really never launches a character relationship. It really doesn't.
Couple times with Wesley, but yeah, you're definitely.
Oh, yeah, with Leffler. I forgot about that.
Yep.
I forgot about Leffler.
Ashley Judd, but
yes.
Yeah,
that's right.
we digress a little bit. So are we ready for first and facts here?
Let's do it.
Wonderful. So Karol Strucken, the actor who plays Mr. Holm, there's a very interesting Star Trek Addams Family connection. The guy who plays Mr. Holm, who the only time you'll ever hear him speak, because he comes back with Lwaxana a couple times, is in this episode. He would later be contracted to play Lurch in the 1991 remake of The Addams Family. There is precedent for this. Mr. Holm, Strucken, played Lurch in the 1991 remake, and Ted Cassidy, who was Rook from the original series episode, What Are Little Girls Made Of, also played Lurch in the 1960s show. So
some 7 degrees right there. Wow.
Exactly, 7 degrees of Lurch.
Yeah, exactly.
So my episode awards here, I only got one, the Picard Facepalm Award. There's actually 2 recipients for this, given to highlight an embarrassing detail of an episode. They run the naked Betazoid wedding gag a little thin, mostly because of Lwaxana Troi and her narcissism.
Yep.
She keeps perseverating on that notion, and it's like, okay, there's the comedy rule of 3s, where you do something 3 times and then it's done. I would venture a guess to say they do this 5 times. They do it over 3.
Oh, and then in like 3 more episodes too, we're going to learn all about it, so.
Oh, yeah. And then again, briefly in Nemesis. They only do that twice, though. Yeah.
You know who else is naked all the time? Ferengi women. This show's got a strange hang-up with that, Anyways.
We could do an episode specifically on Roddenberry and why that is. Trust me,
Okay.
Roddenberry is not a saint in that regard.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's why I got back to the Majel Roddenberry one. There is a story there that we, if there's interest, so the audience, if you're interested in hearing that, we can discuss that, but it's a very complicated. Roddenberry was a complex individual, and his affections make complicate factors even more. So that's the big winner.
You got to give your honorable mention, because I'm going to talk about that when we talk about interiors.
The honorable mention, whatever Riker is doing in his quarters during the episode's teaser. So right before the credits start, he's in his quarters and he's sitting back watching 2 holographic women playing lutes. And he's got this weirdly contented look on his face. It's I don't know. It's just awkward. It's painfully awkward.
If you look at our notes, you could see. Let's talk about that. Let's transition right now to Enterprise interiors. I have to go back, even though we just covered this interior. It's Riker's quarters, because that's where we start, and there he is, hanging out with his feet up on the table, and he's watching 2 holographic women. And he talks to them as on his way. He says, "Sorry, ladies, I don't got any more time for this," or something to that effect. Then he discontinues the projection. You can see that I have like a wide view of his room there, and what's missing is that rock and that shuttlecraft from the last episode. I can't find it anywhere.
Yeah, you're
He
right.
totally redid his quarters. He has got a weird thing on his desk, but it's like a gold circle. It's not a rock anymore. So that made me kind of sad. And okay, so for our second Enterprise interior is, I couldn't find the name of this place. I looked up on the schematics. I looked it up on Memory Alpha. People refer to it as totally different areas. This is called the Lounge, aka the Formal Dining Area, aka the Dining Room. In the script, it's referred to as the Formal Dining Area. And like you talked about, eventually all these, formal gatherings and parties and receptions and concerts will all take place in 10 Forward, but obviously they don't have that set created yet. So in the meantime, we get this kind of boring box hotel conference room. Though I do kind of like that United Federation of Planets plaque behind Picard and Beverly there, to kind of give it an air of gravitas. This is an official dining room or something.
Oh, yeah.
It's more than the crew quarters. It's more than just a redressed crew quarters. So I appreciate that part. So that's my Enterprise interior, the lounge or formal dining room or dining area, whatever you want to call it. And then back to Commander Riker's quarters for, whatever he's doing there.
I haven't the slightest idea. I given it's Riker, all bets are off. Yeah. So, are we ready for Bream out here?
I think so.
This concludes the light version of this episode. On behalf of Scholar Beta, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please stay tuned for deluxe versions of this episode, in which video footage will be interspliced with our commentary to enhance our podcast experience. With all that said, thank you very much for the support. Any feedback you give is appreciated because it helps the kids. And with that said, live long and prosper. E11, and we'll see you next time.